Good morning. I pray that all is well with you. I'd like to thank my dear friend, Dr. Bill McLean, and his extraordinarily accomplished wife, Leslie, for believing that I might have something to say, interesting to say, about fatherhood in general and about Black fatherhood in particular today. Thank you guys for the invitation. I really appreciate it. I would also like to thank Reverend Deborah Bennett and the entire ministerial and support staff for the church for allowing a space for me to explore out loud with you my emerging sense of what it means to be a father and a Black father in today's tumultuous times. Reverend Bennett and I share a common sense of what she calls the two wings of spirituality: the interpersonal work which she says helps to foster a loving heart, and the external work which we are called to in order to foster a more peaceful world. I also would like to acknowledge a few people who have joined me here today: my life partner and my wife of 21 years, Yoko, our two children, Jay and Will, proof of our unwavering belief that there is still time for humanity to get it right. Not here with us today is my oldest son, Hammond of Pittsburgh. Also here is my longtime friend, Mike Durham. Mike and I have been friends for 40 years. We met at MIT so many years ago. So let me say that I'm a little nervous today. This is the first time I've had to, and the first opportunity that I've had to publicly reflect on one of the most valued aspects of my life. I do not just like being a father, I absolutely love being a father. That identity is such a firm part of how I see myself that it would be hard for me to imagine who I would be in a world in which I am not a father. I am not sure which came first, my desire to be a father, or after having been a father, the deep appreciation which welled up inside of me at being in that state. I choose to believe that God heard my desires since the beginning of time and blessed my wife and me with children, then stood back and said, all right, let's see what you can do with them. Which leads me partly to the topic of the day, what it's like to be a Black father in 2021. I've been reflecting on that idea for a couple of months now and have a few interesting insights I think are interesting, some of which I'd like to share. Today I want to talk about Black fathers in 4 moments, and each will be brief, I promise you. In the first moment, which I have already entered, I will tell you a bit more about how I love being a father. In the second moment, I will describe for you racial lens through which I hope you will see how my joys of fatherhood, while related to experiences of white fathers, are similar in form but differ in substance. That is, what we do, what we hope for our children may look alike, but why I do and how I do for my children is rooted in generationally transmitted experiences of trauma and the coping mechanisms that sustained my ancestors then and now me. Third, I will make clear how some of the experiences of Black fatherhood are often tempered when observed through the racial lens, and how some of these experiences have informed the early advice and guidance I gave my children. Finally, in the fourth moment, I will share with you some of the ways I think that together, Black people and white people can develop a sense of common community commitments that forge a network of support for each other's kids, helping our whole village become stronger as a result. So let me reiterate how much I love being a father. Did I mention that already? There are so many, in fact, countless joys that I find being a father. Honestly, it is impossible to enumerate them all, but for the sake of my talk, I have narrowed my considerations to 3 primary areas: learning, laboring, and loving. With regard to learning, watching our children learn about the world around them is an amazing thing. As their senses develop and their ability to process increasingly complex ideas and situations grows, they begin to display and demonstrate their own uniqueness. While we can see sparks of ourselves in them, images of their unique selves begin to form in the world and in our minds. My wife and I have never defined learning as something that happens only or even mostly in the classroom. We have encouraged our children to see the world as their learning space. taking something and giving something of themselves with each encounter, with each person, and with every circumstance. When my wife and I decided to have children, we decided that we needed a set of guiding principles that she and I could agree on. As it turns out, children do not come with instruction manuals, as most parents here would certainly attest. Nevertheless, here we are, entrusted with one of the most sacred of obligations, raising, caring, nurturing of a human life, without a guide or PowerPoint to be found. So we chose to develop a simple set of guiding principles to help us stay focused and to remain on the same page. Ours was to involve in having our children focused on the 3 A's, what we call the 3 A's, academics, athletics, and arts. Our thinking is that there's something for them to learn in the pursuit of each one of these areas. Academics would allow them to explore the possibilities and curiosities of their mind. Athletics would allow them to explore the limits and capabilities of their strong young bodies. And the arts to nurture the growing creativity inside and to experience and perceive the world in their own unique way. It was our earnest belief that pursuing each of these avenues with vigor and excellence would provide them with knowledge about themselves that we as their parents could only hint at or allude to in conversations with them. They have done excellently. With regard to labor, only my oldest son, Jam, is in the workplace. I have marveled at how he seems to be meeting the workplace head-on, deftly navigating his way through and around people and politics. Over the years, I've watched him grow and persist at school and on the job. I have listened anxiously to stories of his work, both triumphs and tragedies. All in all, I am very pleased that he is emerging as a loving, caring adult, that he seems to be on track to accomplish significant achievements in his life and in the lives of others. It is every father's dream to have his children become contributing members of society, to watch them become self-sufficient. Jam has always been interested in supporting people whose voices are often silenced in society. In his current role, he gets to advocate for people from some of the most marginalized communities in Pittsburgh. Jay has aspirations of being a music producer and performer. While he will enroll at Emory in the fall, it is his hope to be discovered, whatever that means, and pushed into the musical spotlight on a much larger scale. Our youngest son, Will, has aspirations of being a research biologist. How someone who turned 16 only a few days ago has any sense of what that means is beyond me. I'm pretty sure at 16 I alternately wanted to be a firefighter and an astronaut. Mostly a firefighter. The thing is this, I want them to be free to exercise their skills and aptitude to wherever they lead, to be able to follow their God-given potential to its natural limits. Don't we all want that for our kids? With regard to love, what can one say? Love is a splendid thing. I think every father longs to see their children in supportive, healthy relationships. We wait with anticipation. We watch with wonder. We reminisce with delight with each tale of joy, each flutter of emerging love, and our hearts ache every time there is a breakup or loss of confidence. I shudder to think that we entrust the psychological, emotional, and sometimes physical well-being of our children to the realms of adolescent love and all that it visits upon our children and our families. But what else are we to do? Young love is a force of nature, isn't it? And yet the kids seem as resilient as ever. World-ending doom one day and joy beyond measure the next. We want our children to be free to pursue the path of their heart, to follow where love leads. Young love is not the whole of life, but it is more than a small part. Who doesn't remember his or her first infatuation, the first hand held, or the first kiss? I wish this for my kids and yours. Holding this kind of hope is the right of a parent. It is the absolute joy of my being a father. So what makes being a black father different? These are the joys that I just mentioned of all fathers. What makes being a black father different? The racial experiences I've had inform my fathering strategies. And again, I will stick with the 3 areas of focus: learning, laboring, and loving. My experience with education and learning has been a mixed one. I grew up in a time of deep racial segregation. I lived in a black community in North Baton Rouge. If you're familiar with Baton Rouge, it's Scotlandville. The schools were dramatically under-resourced, and most of our neighbors were poor and working-class people, as was the case with many neighborhoods, black neighborhoods in the 60s and 70s. The world was not my oyster. The broadest sense of my learning experiences were had among family and friends who looked like me. School was a different world. Interacting with both black and white students in an environment where the primary authority figures were white, often women, teachers, allowed me to develop and foster a new set of coping mechanisms, what W.B. Du Bois calls a double consciousness. At home, I learned the ways of navigating with my friends and peers, and at school, I learned ways of navigating in the white world. When it was time for me to attend Baker High School, where I'd been bused, the district was rezoned and would only enroll out-of-district kids like me who had older brothers or sisters who attended Baker High School. I'm a firstborn, so I don't have an older brother or sister attending Baker High School, and I was initially told I could not attend. So I was surprised when during the summer I got a call from the football coach letting me know that if I was willing to play football, they would allow me to enroll. I may not look like it now, but I was once a stealth machine. I asked my parents for advice. They left the decision up to me. I decided not to go to Baker High School. I learned that summer that my black body could get me into places where my black mind ought to have been sufficient. When I was growing up, I was told that in order to succeed in competition with white people, I had to be twice as good. I was told that I should get a good education because it's something that cannot be taken away from me. I was told that America was a meritocracy where people achieved based on the merits of their ability and contribution. So when I looked around and I didn't see very many black kids in the gifted and talented classes, I was left to wonder, is it that there is no merit in the contributions of our kids? Or is it that their contributions are not valued? Or is it both? Today, my kids are not bused. We're able to live in a community where there is a good school, but there remains a price to be paid. We're the only black family on our street. Most of my kids' friends don't look like them. My kids don't have the security and comfort of racial anonymity. They stick out in many ways, but they stick out. And when they try to blend, there is always the question of authenticity. Are we black enough? Are we Japanese enough? Are we white enough? The skills for coping in a white society are just outside their door. The pressing question for them now is, where do I get the skills to cope in their world of origin? Where do they learn to be black in all of its facets? I do not tell my kids that they have to be twice as good as white kids in order to compete. I tell them that the competition is a lie. To suggest there is a competition is to suggest that the playing field and the rules have been established, have been well communicated to all participants, and will remain fixed throughout the duration of the contest. A fair competition assumes that the outcomes have not been predetermined, that each competitor has a chance to win based on his or her merits. My observations of life suggest fair competition based on merit is a mythological narrative that we live by at our own peril. There is no competition except with themselves to be better tomorrow than they were today. Not that there aren't winners and losers, but that the game is rigged against them from the start. I told them that the measure of their success had to begin and end with them. That's tricky to sell to a teen who comes home and tells you that the C he got in calculus was the result of his very best effort. Something tells me he's misusing my words here, but okay. With regard to laboring, my first professional job, so what I'm telling you now are some of the experiences I've had in learning, in laboring, in love, and how those experiences have informed the advice I gave my children. My first professional job was with an electronics manufacturing plant in Plantation, Florida. Plantation, Florida. What could possibly go wrong with a black man working in Plantation, Florida? I was getting paid $27,000 a year, more money than my mother was making at the time, with a master's degree and over 20 years of work experience. It was a heady time, and yet I could not help but feel there was a divide between the black workers in the facility and the white ones. There were about 300 engineers working in this facility, and about 10 were black, and only one black woman, my ex-wife. She was frequently mistaken as one of the assembly workers, who were mostly black women. The company had a practice of rating and ranking its employees. The rankings were within job categories, so all the engineers were ranked against other engineers. The rankings were supposed to be confidential, but they weren't. All the black engineers in the building were ranked in the bottom 25%. We lacked the kind of mentoring and training that our white counterparts enjoyed. I know we weren't all that bad. Many of us have gone on to be very successful in engineering and other fields. I received an MBA from Emory. I was admitted into the PhD program at MIT. Sloan, my ex-wife, once mistaken as an assembly line worker, and there's nothing wrong with assembly line work, who was once mistaken as an assembly line worker, is now head of the chemical engineering department at MIT. Even though I'm an MIT engineer, I felt unprepared to navigate the predominantly white work world in which I found myself. Excuse me. I say unprepared because when I showed up to be a manufacturing engineer, I had no vision of what that job entailed. No one in my family had been an engineer. They were teachers and laborers and artists. I didn't even know any engineers. And even though I attended a number of pre-college engineering programs and graduated from one of the best engineering schools in the country, I just didn't know what engineering looked like. Feelings of inadequacy affected my self-esteem and negatively impacted my young marriage. So my objective in fathering my kids so that they are better prepared for work is to expose them to activities in their areas of interest. I'm able to do that. I have friends who are lawyers. I have friends who are engineers. I have friends who are PhD organizational strategists. I don't pretend that it will level the playing field. I don't try to do that. But I give my kids what they need to feel a bit more secure in their skin than I did in my early work life. I try to remove as many barriers to their advancement as I can, but I can only do so much. What remains to be done is up to them. With regard to loving, when I was born in August of 1962, the marriage that now completes me was illegal. It is hard to imagine how a relationship of love can be illegal. But there you have it. And so what is a young black romantic to do, growing up in a time when the very relationship that can complete me is not only inaccessible, but quite likely punishable? What lessons are there for a young person in that time? How do you imagine I was counseled by my parents with regard to my choice for a romantic partner? It is not just the interracial aspect of dating that complicates the courting patterns of young black kids. It is also the challenge of dating people who may live in actively policed communities. And not just those communities, but any time a black child, especially but not exclusively, a male child has to drive to drop off his or her date. He or she is at risk of being targeted by the police. My son Jay drives a relatively nice car, certainly nicer than when I drove when I was 19. Each time he visits his girlfriend, who lives only a few blocks away, my wife and I worry until he gets there and texts us to let him know he's arrived safely. And we worry when he leaves until he gets back home. So when I talk to my boys about dating, I don't encourage them to date only black or mixed race kids. I encourage them to follow their hearts and to do it mindfully of how society might look at them and how society might treat them. I've had the talk with my sons about driving while black and have told them that his objective each time he leaves the house is to return alive. It is not a talk that I imagine many white fathers have with their children. I want my children to be happy. I want them to love. But more than that, I want them alive. So where do we go from here? I shared with you my hopes for my kids. On the face of it, they look very much like the hopes of any father would have for his children. I want them to learn about the world and themselves. I want them to live productive, self-sufficient lives. I want them to find love and build healthy, respectful relationships. Where I, as a black father, differ from some white fathers is in how I imagine we secure those hopes for our kids. My personal experience with racism, both individual and institutional, as well as the legacy of the experiences which have been transmitted to me through the experiences of my ancestors, inform the way I raise my children. Just as the personal and legacy experiences of white fathers inform the way they raise their children. In order for us, black people and white people, black fathers and white fathers, in order for us to realize the beloved community, one characterized by a recognition of our common humanity, we must first acknowledge and embrace that the arc of our interracial animus is rooted in oppressive and resistive forces. These forces transfigurate over time to maintain an archaic sense of superiority and unearned privilege on the one hand, and a will to articulate and project an authentic self which has become muddled during 400 years of dislocation and subjugation. As a black father, I have had to squarely face the resistive forces and the attendant coping mechanisms that have been gifted me. Gifts not out of malice or meant to perpetuate anger against white people. They were gifts given of love, and I'm sure meant to ensure my survival. Nonetheless, in order to move forward, and I do think it is to move forward, I have had to move progressively through three important phases: recovery, reconciliation, and finally redemption. Recovery, the action or process of regaining possession or control of something lost or stolen. Regaining control of my sense of self that is not determined by, even as it is informed by, acts of violence and dehumanizing behavior against me. Regaining control of a sense of self that is not determined by, even as it is informed by, acts of violence and dehumanizing behavior against me. If I do not take this step, I risk colluding in perpetuation of the very thing I seek most in the world, raising kids who authentically can claim for themselves a place in it. Reconciliation is the restoration of friendly relations. Living in a world where I am simultaneously resisting the dehumanizing and diminished images of who I am at the same time trying to assert an authentic self that is disorienting at best and psychologically fragmenting nominally. So the reconciliation I speak of is internal. I need to foster a restoration of friendly relations with myself. And finally, redemption, the action of saving or being saved from sin, error, or evil. In this case, I am both saving and being saved from the errors of generational transmission, of hurt and harm, of limits and fear. My ancestors did not mean that this should be the end state of my being, but a cocoon from which I could finally emerge someday, my whole self. As a black father, my prayer for all of us today is that we will strive to find, as I have and continue to, the strength and the will to break the chains that bind us to our respective pasts. That you will do your work to recover, reconcile, and redeem your humanity as I have. I invite you to join me in this process, even though our processes are necessarily different. Because it is not until I am free and you are free that we can hope to form the beloved community in which our children are safe and whole. But as I'm fond of saying, my wife will tell you so, hope alone is not a strategy. So let courage, compassion, and love be our watchword. Amen.